evening, ladies and gentlemen, and all those out there on Zoom are also ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our school board meeting tonight. It is 6:30, and this is really loud, so I hope I don't blow you out of here. But if you please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance, and the flag is right above us here. A couple of them. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Don't just sit down without looking.
Thank you.
Thank you. So agenda adjustments. I would like to propose that we move 5.6, the presentation by Mr. Bailey, to immediately follow this item 1.3 so that he can do his presentation, and then let him hit on the road and get back on his way. So I would, these have to be approved. And because we do have two members who are Zooming in, for everybody's information, is Christy and Dory are Zoomed in. Vicki notified us that she's not feeling well enough even to Zoom in. And Scott is unavailable tonight. He has another commitment. So at this point, I would entertain a motion to move 5.6 to follow 1.3.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All right, then we'll take a vote. And
Vicki? Oh, is not here. Christy? Yes. Dory? Yes. Robbie?
Yes.
Diane?
Yes.
Jen?
Yes.
Joe?
Yes.
Bob?
yes?
Passes.
Okay. Thank you very much. So introduce Mr. Steve Bailey. He's the Executive Director of the Maine School Management Association. We invited him here tonight in order to provide some guidelines on school board. We have some new members. It's been a while since we've had this presentation, and so therefore we thought it might be beneficial. So at this time, we'll turn it over to you, Mr. Bailey.
Very good. Thank you very much. And I'm glad to be here this evening. Yes, Steve Bailey, Executive Director of the Maine School Management Association. I'm also the Executive Director of the Maine School Boards Association. So I serve you in a couple of different capacities, and very pleased to be here tonight. I am going to work off some slides that we have for you in your packets. And I want to make sure that you know where we are in terms of the kind of materials. So on your packets, and the people who are at home, unfortunately you don't have them with you tonight, so you'll be observing what is going on with regard to what's on the screen. We do have packets for you that you'll be able to receive from your superintendent's office after the meeting tonight. So wanted to make sure that you know we're here for you in a variety of different ways for board members, and this is going to help me for sure in terms of if you could just let me know who you are, as well as the number of years or months, years that you've been on the board. That would help me in terms of our conversation presentation tonight. So we'll start right over here, if you would, please.
Yep, Robert Gayton Jr. from Sabattis, 22 years.
And I think, Robert, I was here probably 3 or 4 years ago, and I think I remember seeing you at that point in time,
Yeah.
too. So good to see you again.
Yep, thank you.
Joe Fisher, Sabattis, 2 years.
Okay. Thank you, Joe.
Jen Waterman, Sabattis, 3 years.
Okay, thank you.
Diane Whalen, Sabattis, 3 years.
Okay. And Robert?
No, I've been on the board for a couple of months. Just a month, but for 3 years.
He's on a 3-year term.
Oh, okay. Very good. Thank you. And who's at home?
So they can't quite hear you, Steve. I'm not quite sure. They said you sound like you're underwater.
Making masks.
We've got Christy Willett and Sure. Christy Willett, I am from Litchfield, and I've been on the
I did hear that, yes.
Okay, Dory?
Dory Upham, Litchfield, and my term actually, I'm gonna need to have another election this June.
Okay.
So-
Thank,
And I'm Bob English, I'm from Wales. According to our town officials, I've been on the board for about 25, going on 26 years. I've been here for a little while.
yes, you have. Good to see you again. Now, whether the volume will make a difference, hopefully, maybe they can hear me a little bit better now?
I think unfortunately, they're picking it up off of the laptop.
Okay. And so that's coming out of the speaker to the laptop and then, right, okay. Well, we'll try to make sure that we can do it as best as possible. In your packets, you do have two different sides. Obviously, on the left-hand side is a series of slides. They're going to very much mirror what's on the screen here. On the right-hand side, you'll have a series of handouts. Those handouts will be referred to as we get to different aspects of the presentation tonight. So we'll continue to move on. Our purpose tonight is really to review school boards in Maine as it relates to the Maine statutes. And I will just point out to you right out from the get-go that your authority, your responsibility is provided to you by Maine law through the Maine statutes, not from municipal law, but from the Maine law book and from the legislature, the Maine legislature. Another aspect of tonight is to try to think about how you can work together, develop yourself as a team. You are the governance team for your school administrative unit. You're the elected officials to be able to do that, and so as a team, that's where and how you work together to be able to make those decisions. So this is also a part of board learning. You have different times that you take throughout the course of your school board year to be able to pay attention to different things that are important to you as a board. Sometimes that includes board topics that are of importance to you to be able to increase your learning as a board, together as a board. And then most importantly tonight, think about how you can develop the strong collective understanding and roles and responsibilities of school board members. You're the only body, elected body in the state like this. And through that, you're able to get those roles identified for you through the law book, through the statutes, and we'll be going through those tonight. So if we can get started, we will. I want to find out from you before we actually begin too much further, if there's anything you specifically as a board member wanted to have brought up tonight or talked about, knowing that this was going to be a topic on the agenda. Were there things that come to mind or came to mind as you're coming to the meeting tonight that you wanted to make sure were talked about with regard to this type of a presentation or workshop? And I'll leave that open-ended and we'll think time for a little bit. Anything that comes to mind? Any from our two at home?
Nope.
Okay. All right, then, we'll try to keep it as informal as we can. I want to talk, from the screen itself, yet at the same time, want you to think, if you have questions that come up, please ask them at the time. Don't wait until the end. It's better to try to address them at the time we're talking. Okay. So I first want to mention for you that as the school administrative unit governing body, your statutory powers come from the section in the law book. It's Education Statutes 20A, and it's subsection 1001, where you have 22 different subsections that are your responsibility to make sure you know what you're supposed to be doing. And that's where your authority is given to you through the state statutes. It's on the website, it's under legislature, it's under statutes, and then if you go to Title 20A, you'll see subsection 1001. And within that set of statutes, and we're going to refer to your handout number 1 and 2 that are on the right-hand side of your packet. These two first handouts. The first one basically is a summary of what the state statute says. And essentially, it provides you the opportunity to know that you have the responsibility for paying attention to legislative and policy-making responsibilities. You also are responsible for educational programming within the district. You're also responsible for personnel and employment of staff, although it is the superintendent who actually does the hiring of staff. You also have a quasi-judicial role, meaning that there are times when you're going to be acting as a judge or jury. That may come in the case of a student expulsion or a student's extended suspension, or perhaps a teacher dismissal or teacher discharge type of situation. Thankfully, that doesn't happen very often, but when it does, those situations are handled in executive session because it's a very private, confidential matter, but a very serious one, and one that you as a school board member, you would be taking very seriously. You also have a strong responsibility for budget and finance, because you need to be able to provide the finances and resources necessary for your students to be able to get the kind of education you want within your district. At the same time, you need to balance that within the financial capability of your communities. You're responsible for maintaining the facilities, making sure that students and staff have adequate places to be able to engage in the kind of educational situations that you want for them. And you also need to be able to communicate with the public. Now, this particular set of statutes is kind of memorialized for you within your policy BBA, which is School Board Powers and Responsibilities. So that's handout number 2 that we want to talk about. Within this particular handout, it speaks about your responsibility as a board. And as a board, you need to concern yourself primarily with broad questions of policy rather than with administrative details. So that begins the conversation about what do you do as well as what does the superintendent do. If you're dealing more with policy type decisions, you're really at the 20 or 30,000 foot level, and you've actually delegated to the superintendent and the administrative team and people that have been hired to do those details the work of the district. So you're going to be able to help set the stage, and then you're going to turn it over to the administrators to be able to say, okay, now go do it, and then come back and tell us how it went. Because you're going to hold the administrators responsible for making sure that things happen the way that you hope that they were going to be set out. So you enact policy, you select and employ the superintendent, you provide for the planning, expansion, improvement, financing, construction, and maintenance of the physical plant, you prescribe the minimum standards needed for the efficient operation of and the improvement of the school system, you require the establishment and maintenance of records, accounts, archives, management records, you develop the budget, financial reports, etc., and you also estimate the funds necessary from taxes for the operation and support of the schools. One of the responsibilities you have too, and sometimes part of this is delegated to staff, is to adopt courses of study, providing staff and instructional aids, evaluate the educational program, provide for dissemination of information, and also approve or disapprove personnel nominations from the superintendent. So those are the things within your policy that you've set forth that you expect to be doing for yourselves and for the district. And if I could, I'd just like to talk about policies from the standpoint, you have a policy manual. It's online. It's accessible to everybody. And those policies are really your rules of the road. They're your roadmap. They're your foundation. Those are what you should be referring to when you have a question about, can we do this, or how should we be doing this? One of the things you should be doing is going to your policy manual, see, do we have a policy that relates to that and guides us in terms of how we should be making those decisions? So, in terms of what we just went through, adopting policy is your major goal, is your major responsibility. So from there, you go and take other actions based on what it is you want to have as goals for the district. So, I'm going to move on to the next slide. And the next slide talks about how you got to where you are. As individuals, you either ran for office or you were elected or you're appointed, but you came from a position of being an individual running for a school board position. You won, you got elected to the board, and then all of a sudden, now you're part of a team. You're part of RSU4. And so you represent RSU4. And we're going to talk a little bit about this because it speaks to the issue of who you're working for. You have no authority as individuals, only when you're working together as a board. And so the only time you really are a school board is when you're an officially called, publicized meeting, and you have a quorum of people to be able to conduct that meeting. Now, my guess is you have weighted voting. Would that be right? And so in terms of your weighted voting, that also helps determine whether or not you have a quorum, as well as what the majority is based on who's present at the meeting. So in terms of that...
Shut up, you fat fuck. No one wants to hear you.
So in terms of this particular slide, no authority as individuals, only as a board.
Stop.
This next slide really reiterates that as well. No authority except when acting as part of the majority of the board. So when the majority of the board takes an action, makes an action, takes a vote, then all of a sudden you have made a decision and you therefore are going to follow whatever that action is. It's possible when the board decides that one person should have authority to do something, like be on the negotiations committee and act for the school board in that particular capacity, or serve on some other committee that board members would be on, then the board, by their vote, would provide authority to that individual to be doing that. But otherwise, it's as a board, and it needs the action of the board to be able to be determined that was legal and authorized. This is the part that I'd like to talk a little bit about, because it really talked about no authority as an individual, and who do you represent? Well, you were elected by a town, but as soon as you were elected and you were sworn in and became a board member for RSU4, you represent RSU4. So you represent the students of RSU4. So you need to be thinking about all students, all schools within your towns, in terms of being responsible for everything and about RSU4. Now, you still are going to be speaking to people within your community, within your neighborhood, and you're going to be bringing those thoughts to the table whenever you make a consideration for a decision. But your thought should be, how is this going to affect all of the students, all of the schools, equitably within your RSU, within your school district? So, who do you represent? You represent the board as an enterprise. So that's a little bit of a different situation than what selectmen might think about when they take office. It's a different situation than a legislator might think about when they take office in Augusta, because they very definitely are representing the people that elected to put them there. That's not the case within the school board, and it's not readily understood by members of our public either, in terms of what they think about school board members, when they get elected to a school board. By state statute, you are representing the entire entity. There's one handout that I'd like to make reference for you, and this is handout number 3. And the part of handout number 3 that I'd like us to pay attention to is the indented paragraph down near the bottom. And there was a court case in Yarmouth that helped determine this particular case. This was a case before the Supreme Court. But it talks about actually two things. They're going to look at the paragraph just above that indented section as well. The Maine Constitution affords control over education to the Maine legislature. School boards are creatures of statute with their duties and responsibilities described therein. The nexus of concern about school boards' responsibilities for and responsiveness to their respective communities appears to be the statement contained in a decision of the Maine's Law Court, that the school committee acts as a public board. It in no sense represents the town. Its members are chosen by the voters of the town, but after election they are public officers deriving their authority from the law and responsible to the state for the good faith and rectitude of their acts. So it's by the Maine Constitution that education became the responsibilities of the town, and then it's the legislative statutes that provides the governance for what school boards are to be doing. That case in Yarmouth had a situation where a student moved into town. Actually, it was a ward of the state, and they felt as if it shouldn't be their responsibility to pay for the student's education. And the law court said, no, yes, indeed it is your responsibility to pay for that student. That was a case that was heard probably about 100 years ago, but it's still the law right now that applies to making sure that school units are responsible for all the students, within their school administrative district. So again, that's an important one for us to be able to pay attention to, thinking about who it is you represent. Your constituents are the students of RSU4, while at the same time paying attention, importantly, to those people that you live next to, beside, within the community, the people you see and talk to about what it is that they want, for you within your educational system, within your RSU. Very quickly, I just want to go over some of the information as it relates to what does the board do, what do superintendents do. In this particular slide, I want to start from the bottom up, because one of the most important things you can do as a board and superintendent working together is to be able to think about how you're going to communicate and how that communication helps build trust between each other of you as board members as well as with the superintendent. So this particular slide really speaks to the goal of trying to create, establish, and maintain and nurture that communication and trust. That happens best when you work in a cyclical relationship back and forth of the superintendent making recommendations to you, you taking action through the vote that you would be taking, and then the superintendent then implementing whatever the action is that was decided upon within that particular item. Now, the board is going to be concerned with different kinds of questions, and it's important for the superintendent to be able to provide that level of information for you. You're going to be concerned with what, why, and how much. And you're also going to be concerned at a higher level, thinking about policies, goals, mission, and vision in terms of what the board should be doing for the district. The superintendent is going to be thinking about different kinds of questions like, well, how am I going to get there? When is it going to happen? Where am I going to be able to do this? And who is actually going to be doing it? And so their questions are going to be more of the how. Yours is going to be the what in terms of the end results. Theirs is going to be the how in terms of the means to get there. And they're going to be concerned with objectives, action plans, regulations, and procedures. So at a higher level, this really speaks to you as a school board selecting the superintendent, setting policy, adopting budget, and acting as a board or a court of appeals in those judicial situations that I talked about before. The superintendent is going to be selecting staff, recommending and implementing policy, proposing and administering budgets, as well as taking action based on policies that the board adopts. So within that, you have within your handouts, you have a board policy that speaks to the relationship between the superintendent and the board. And I believe that's handout number 5. And it's this policy that you've adopted to put in place that really does help establish what it is you want the superintendent to be doing. You as a board are going to be doing legislative policy making. However, the management of the schools is a function of the superintendent. You as the board holds the superintendent responsible for complying with the laws, rules, and regulations, and for administering board of directors' policies and decisions. So this is your policy in terms of trying to establish what that relationship is between what you as a board would do as well as what the expectations are of the superintendent. Any questions there? Okay, then let's move on to another important aspect of your responsibilities. And this is one, I can't really speak enough to this particular topic. A board member code of ethics, we talked before about the policies being your roadmap. in terms of your rules of the road, the foundation for what you do. The Board of Directors Code of Ethics, your policy BCA, I would describe to you and for you as pretty much your job description. And I honestly would say it would be important for this to be known by people even before they take up the role of what it means to be a school board member. Because what you have here is a series of I will statements. And really the intent of this is to determine what your commitments are to each other as well as to the public in carrying out your roles as school board members. So these obviously were not made this year. You didn't make them up this year. If you look on the back of the policy, you'll identify when this last was revised, and it was December of 2018. So it was a board before you. Some of you were on this board, but it was a board before you that actually looked at this and said, these are important for us to pay attention to. So I like to point out some of these as we go down through these. I also would say that there are some boards who take a look at these yearly. They take a look annually to be able to just make sure they pay attention to them. So they might have a board retreat in the summertime to be able to identify how they've done in the past year, to be able to set goals for where you might like to think you should be going as a district for the following year. And also to take a look at your code of ethics to determine, okay, how are we going to conduct ourselves with each other, both during meetings as well as outside of meetings. So some of these that I'd like to point out would be letter B. I will at all times think of children first and base my decisions on how they will affect children, their education, and their training. Letter E is another one I think important, even though they're all important. But letter E is I'll recognize that my responsibility is not to operate the schools, but to see that they are well operated. So again, it speaks to your role as school board members versus the role of the superintendent and the administration. Letter G, I'll listen to all citizens, but will refer all complaints to the proper authorities and will discuss such complaints only at regular meeting after failure of administrative solution. So that really suggests a policy regarding complaints and concerns. It also suggests a policy of looking at the hierarchy of where you go with certain concerns and look at the lowest level possible to be able to take care of those before you bring that issue to the school board. Letter H is another important one. This is one for all boards. I'll support a decision made by the majority of the board of directors graciously. Now that majority is, as we talked about before, that weighted majority, yet at the same time there are going to be people on the side of the vote that had more votes and people on the side of the votes that had fewer votes. But that was the will of the board, that was the vote of the board. And maybe now's a little bit of a time too to talk about how decisions are made, within your meetings. We support the idea that within your agenda, that motion should be made, seconded, and then you end up having a discussion. So you know what you're discussing and what you're deliberating. And as board members, you want to be as informed as you can be before you come to the meeting to be able to engage in that meaningful conversation so that your voice can be heard during that time of deliberation. And then the vote's taken. So I'm going to say one thing first. Silence during those deliberations and conversations implies consent. So it's important that your voice be heard if you have a difference of opinion. You don't necessarily need to be heard just to lay it on somebody else's idea, even though that sometimes is a good idea as well. And then the other part of this, if silence implies consent, then you want to make sure that you're having the opportunity to discuss and participate in those conversations before the vote's made. That's important because when you come to letter H on your code of ethics, I will support a decision made by the majority of the board of directors graciously, means that, okay, you understand why the vote was made. You might not agree with it, but you understand why it was made and you've had your opportunity to be able to participate in that conversation, and the will of the majority of the board went in that particular direction. And that's where the board is going, that's where the district is going at that particular point in time. You're making the decisions you make with the best information you have at the time, with the best interest of students in mind. And those are the kinds of things you should think about as you're making the deliberations and taking those votes. So there are several others here on the backside as well. I think the letter K is an important one too. I'll refuse to make promises as to how I will vote on a matter that should properly come before the board of directors as a whole. The importance of that one is if you promise in terms of what your vote's going to be before you get here, you haven't had the full deliberation yet. You haven't had the full conversation yet. And there may be information that comes to you during that deliberation, during that conversation, that might alter your decision. And so it's important for you to be able to come to the table with a relative open mind in terms of being able to think about what the opinions and topics, the points of view that other people would have when they come to the board meeting. Letter O is an important one as you think about the entire district. I will endeavor at all times to see that schools have adequate financial support within the capabilities of the community and state in order that every child may receive the best education possible. So those are the kinds of things. I have seen boards who have taken this and they actually, during that retreat, they would actually have board members sign it. So that it's an acknowledgement that you understand, okay, this is what I've signed up for. These are the kinds of things and these are the commitments I'm making and have made to each other to be able to conduct myself as a board member. So that's an important one, I think, as well.
Mr. Bailey?
Yes.
Can I make a recommendation just because of we're 30 minutes in, we still got over half the slides, numbers. Instead of reading our policies to us, which many of us have seen, if you can go over why the policy is important and how the policy in general impacts, and then since you have our policies there, then we can read it again and be reinforced that way. It's kind of more on why we have these responsibilities. I don't know, it's awful hard to hear you because the acoustics in this gym, and I know that people online are probably even having a more difficult time.
Sure thing.
Right, that way we can get you out, we can get out, and we can still get the information that we really need.
Wonderful. What I'd like to do then is go to your policy BEA. I'd like to stop by this slide first for just a minute, which basically is just to think about recognizing your lane, know your lane. Again, we stated this before about recognize that your responsibility is not to operate the schools, but to see that they're well operated. But if you go to your handout number 11, that's your slide on electronic mail. And yes, you have a policy on it. It's important that you know it. It's important that you know that you can't use email to substitute for the purposes of you coming together at a board meeting. Your business needs to be in the light of day. It needs to happen in the public. That's through the Right to Know Committee. It's also through the Freedom of Action Act. So you can't use email to go behind the public to be able to make decisions or have deliberations about a decision to indicate that you already know where you're going to vote before you actually get to the meeting. So that's something that's very, very important. The other part of that in terms of policy BEA is that make sure you keep confidential information out of emails. Staff names, student names, family names, keep that out of your communications. Make sure you look at your communications before you send them. And then know in terms of policy BEA that anything you do with regard to school business on email, and I would include Twitter, I would include Facebook, I would include any other social media platform you use, that all of those records are, and if they're having to do with board business, that they are considered board business and can be part of a freedom of access request, and you'd have to make those records available to the people who had requested them. So those are some things you need to be very, very careful about. There's other information in there that relates to your use of social media and your communications with each other. Any questions about social media? I would say one more thing about this. As board members, you're elected as board members, you're also individuals. But anything you put out there on social media, people are going to know that you're a school board member. So they're going to ask the question, is this communication, is this as a school board member or is this as the individual? They might presume that it's as a school board member. So it's very important for you to make sure that anything you put out there doesn't reflect badly back on the district. Because as a board member, you want to have it reflect positively on the district. You're an advocate for the district, you're an advocate for the students, so be very careful about what you put out there and what you post, how you post it, where you post it, in order to be able to have your presence and your position as a board member reflect positively on your work. So that would be it as it relates to social media. Another piece that I'd like to speak about, and I don't know whether you have this policy or not, but in your packet, if I could have you look at, let's see, I think it's 17. Yes. Please, if you would, look at handout number 17. As I went through your policies, I couldn't find this in your policies, and you may have it. And do you know if you have it or not? It's public complaints or concerns and complaints.
I don't know, we'd have to.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't recall as policy and personnel meetings, we've been reviewing the policy book, but we haven't seen something like this yet.
And so I do know that this typically comes up at these trainings, as well as the questions that people have about how do you direct folks, how do you as people, as school board members, if you get asked out in the public or at the grocery store or at a ball game, whatever, they've got a concern, how do you help direct them to be able to have their question answered? So a policy such as this provides guidelines not only for you, but also for people that have those kinds of questions and requests to be able to identify that they need to go back, and we call it at the lowest possible level. So if it's a classroom or a school issue, that you'd ask them to go back and see if they could explore the situation with their teacher or with the school principal, or it might be with the director of transportation. Be able to take a look at where those issues might be handled at a very low level. And then it might bump up to the superintendent if it couldn't be resolved at that level. But really try to encourage the engagement of conversation at that lowest level. And so this is another policy that I would recommend that if you don't have it, that you do please consider it.
This does state what our policy, verbally policy is, we do. So we might have it incorporated somewhere else, or we may have this, but this is our normal procedure to reference people that talk.
Yeah. And it's great to be able to have that in writing, for folks to be able to point out where you to have to put that in place. The next policy that I know that you have, it was adopted in 2019 because there was a law change that required a difference in how and where public comment would occur on whole meetings of the school board. So you've got policy BEDH, which is your public participation policy, and it does pretty well spell out the expectations you have as board chair, as well as a board, in terms of when and where and how public comment can be provided. Now that's really important to be able to know. It does not extend to committees, subcommittees. It does extend for all your full board meetings. So workshops, special board meetings, there would still need to be a time for a public comment period at that point. The only time it wouldn't, obviously, it would be if a board meeting were called for an executive session, then you wouldn't have a public comment period on the executive session. Now, within that area of the public participation policy, right behind it, I did provide to you several different types of openings that can be provided as statements, both at the beginning of a meeting as well as just prior to the public comment section, and then there's also a public script that could be utilized if you wanted to, just prior to the public comment period, if you felt that was going to be helpful and needed before you actually get into the public comment period. The very last policy that I would point out to you would be one on school board evaluation. I think there's a sample policy in there as well. One of the things that we do recommend is that boards consider their own self-evaluation to be able to take a look at how have you done over the past year and other goals that you would like to work toward over the course of the next year. That self-evaluation provides you the opportunity really to be able to look at each other and look at the work that you've done and be able to consider goals you want to set for moving forward during that next year. With that, really, I guess I would take questions in terms of any you might have about the materials we've talked about so far. I know one of the things that we typically talk about is the Freedom of Act training that you're supposed to be doing. New board members are supposed to do that within 120 days of being sworn in. We talked about that as it related to the electronic email and all. But just make sure that you're conducting your actions of the board within the public, within a quorum. Try to make sure that you are lawful as it relates to the records that you're keeping as well as sending to each other, and that you're not using email in a manner that substitutes for doing your business in the public. So with that, other questions that you might have?
Any questions?
None on Zoom.
And none from our people on Zoom? Anybody out in the audience have any? All right. Well, I thank you for coming.
Thank you for these slides. I think it's pretty self-explanatory for those who aren't here as well, so thank you.
Good. Well, you do have the other materials also for the people who couldn't come tonight, and they'd be able to get those as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we will wait a couple of minutes to let Mr. Bailey get himself all put together. And our educational technician back there, IT guy.
He's going to have to turn the camera. Jordan, can you switch the... Thank you.
Oh.
Kathy, the surveys, is he taking them directly, or are we
I can't hear
sending
you.
them? Are we just sending the surveys along?
We'll have everyone do it, and then we'll send them together.
Okay, perfect.
All right, I think we can go on with approval of the minutes. At this time, I'd entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the December 8, 2021 and December 29, 2021 Board of Directors meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Comments, corrections? Seeing none, nobody on Zoom? Okay. That being said, then we'll call for the vote.
Christie? Yes. Dory? Yes. Robbie?
Yes.
Diane?
Yes.
Jen?
Yes.
Joe?
Yes.
Bob?
Yes. All right, thank you. At this time, I'll open it up for public comments. Again, a reminder to those who are either here or online. Public comments is an opportunity to speak about things going on in our school system. Please keep it civil. We do not mention people's names. It is not a time to make derogatory comments towards any staff or student. If you have those, then please contact our administrators independently. to discuss it, and if necessary, on to our superintendent. So at this time, if there's anybody that would like to address the board, and this is not a back and forth, this is your opportunity to make a statement and to make a comment. So if those on Zoom, if you can raise your hand, we'll invite you to turn on your mic. Those who are out there that it's not the time to talk, if you can keep your mic silenced so we don't get any feedback, it would be appreciated. If you can raise your hand, we can call on you out on Zoom. If there's anybody here in the audience, please come forward to the mic.
There's no one on Zoom.
So we have nobody indicating they'd like to make a comment tonight. I'd like to thank everybody who is in attendance and listening in for attending and seeing what's going on with your school board. At this time, petition communications, I'm not aware of any.
None?
Reports, superintendent's report.
So I have a few things tonight. Well, first we want to say that it's National School Board Recognition Month. So we have a little certificate, and thanks to Jamie for some chocolates on the tables, but we just wanted to thank you for your dedication, your support, and commitment to the RSU. So thank you very much. This afternoon, we did email the board about a couple of water issues at the high school. We did have a sprinkler that did burst, and it did trigger the fire alarm, so students in the high school had to evacuate and follow the evacuation protocol and were able to be accounted and came back in, and it was dismissal time, so then went right back out onto buses. About a couple hours later, we did have another water pipe burst in the kitchen. It is all cleaned up, and we are ready to go for tomorrow. So just wanted to update you on the water. The other thing you need to know is an SOP was embargoed yesterday, was released today, so we had an updated SOP for how to handle with positive cases. It was updated we had one that was updated on December 29th, and we had another one that was updated today. There are some significant changes to how they would like us to deal with COVID. There are some things that our team is going to make some minor changes, and then other ones we are going to wait for the collaborative planning team to meet next week. Andy will be sending out information to those members that were identified for that team. And it's mostly about identifying close contacts and reporting, as well as isolation periods. Also want you to be aware that the Supreme Court is ruling on the Bosch ruling on the 18th, which is next week. That is part of the Biden's vaccination requirement. Depending on how that ruling goes, we have started a process to create a procedure for the RSU4 to how to be in compliant with whatever the ruling will be. There will be certain regulations that if it does pass will have to be put into place by February 17th, and then we'll have to have full implementation of the ruling by March 19th. So we'll keep you updated after the Supreme Court rules of how that will look for the RSU. So those are the 4 things I have for you tonight.
All right, so we have some appointments and resignations.
Yes, Sarah Bedard was an appointment at Tech 3 at the middle school. Some resignations is Glenn Reynolds, Director of Operations, Brianne Napolitano, Grade 1 teacher at SPS, and Diane Whitmore, French teacher at Oak Hill High School at the end of the school year. He's later on.
Oh, we got him down there. That's right, I remember seeing it now. All right. Do you have a report, Director of CAI?
I do not.
All right, and we have principals' reports, oral reports. Ben going to start us off. All right, Ben.
So the other day we had a drop everything and read in a dark period at Splash Primary School, which was pretty exciting. We passed out.
Can you turn that mic on? I think it's not on. It is? Okay.
There's no mic. No.
No, we're not hearing you. Maybe
might
it's
have to
just too,
hold it.
he had to hold it pretty close to.
Or you can.
Yeah,
I feel like I got a rap now.
yeah, okay.
Let's take this one.
So at Splash Primary School the other day, so at Splash Primary School the other day, we had a Drop Everything and Read in the Dark event, which was pretty exciting. So you passed flashlights out to all the students, shut the lights off in the building, and everyone found a nook to go read in for about 35, 40 minutes at the end of the day. Miss Johnson was there, took some beautiful pictures. You can see them on our Facebook page, but it's always exciting to see students get excited about reading, especially, fun reading on their own. And it's awesome to have events like this just pop up and happen at school. It was very engaging for everyone involved. At the middle school, we had the Friends of the Coppice have come and joined us. Mr. Ireland every year has done raising of trout. This year, he is the teacher of our 5th, 6th grade STEM team, so we have a variety of students participating in that event, as well as Mrs. Schultz has now joined him. So we have 2 classrooms now raising trout and learning about the ecosystems in our local watersheds, which is pretty exciting. So Mr. Ireland promises not to catch all the fish once he releases them. For those of us who know, Mr. Ireland is an avid fly fisherman. But we're learning about the importance of diversification in our ecosystems, our local ecosystems, which is pretty exciting. So the conversation about the trout that we're raising is around how most of them will become food for the local organisms that will feed off of them. But it's a great learning experience for our 5th and 6th grade team. So any questions on that?
No.
Any other questions about the middle school? Okay. Primary school?
Not on
No.
Zoom.
No?
All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Allenberty, Marco?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Happy New Year to each of you, and thank you for a few moments to share some happenings at Oak Hill High School. The Oak Hill Legislative Assembly, OHLA, had a banner season in putting together holiday baskets and running the toy drive for the school community. Once a high school initiative, the holiday baskets has grown to become a school district initiative with all schools and central office participating. Baskets contain food, clothing, home goods, and toys for families in need. We're happy to report that this year's efforts supported 38 families in RSU4 and subsequently 98 kids, which is amazing. We had over $2,000 in local businesses and individual donations, and a school-wide food drive helped to round out the baskets. Coinciding with the holiday baskets was the annual toy drive, which is a partnership between Oak Hill High School and Sabattis Police Department. Donations were dropped off to volunteers who braved the elements to ensure plenty of gifts ended up under trees, again, throughout the community. As principal of Oak Hill High School, I'm truly honored and appreciative of the efforts of those involved, and a sincere thank you to all of those who participated. During our holiday break, we ran a successful vacation school, which ran Monday through Thursday from 8 to noon. A vacation school is an opportunity for students to work with content area teachers to get additional support. We averaged roughly 15 students per day, many of which completed work in preparation for the end of the semester. And a thank you to Katie Stubbs, one of our teachers at the high school, for organizing a vacation school this year. And finally, as I just mentioned, the end of the first semester is approaching very quickly, specifically Friday, January 14th. There's a flurry of activity happening between students and teachers to ensure courses are in good shape. A huge thanks to our students and staff for keeping their eye on the prize with all that is going on around us. And that concludes my report. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Questions? Any online? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Jamie.
I didn't learn from you yet then. Good evening. Feels like forever since I've done a report for the board. Lots of fun stuff happened around the holidays. We did Thanksgiving events and Christmas and other holidays. In the classrooms, we did a rotating schedule here with different activities by each teacher, which was a lot of fun. Even with our 2 remote days at the end there, we still pulled everything together the week before and got through all of the fun events that were planned. Coming back from the holiday break, students have settled back into the school schedule well. Lots of SOP reviews, teachers focusing on social emotional learning to support that transition. We're working a lot on literacy right now, meeting with coaches regularly, planning professional development, different activities for students. There'll be a lot of information shared with families in the near future as we approach the month of March. which is full of literacy events that we're very excited about. January testing window has begun. Grade 4 was supposed to be having the National Assessment of Educational Progress, or the NAEP test, administered to some of our students on January 27th. I received an email from the Maine Department of Ed that due to staffing shortages, that will not take place. It is supposed to be rescheduled, but no date has been shared at this time. And super excited to be bringing an assistant principal candidate to you on the agenda with some great experience with all 4 grade levels in the 2 schools. So that's a new exciting thing for us happening in Litchfield. That's all I got for right now.
Any questions?
Thank you.
But before you leave,
Yes.
I'd like Mr. Wilson and Mr. Alberti to notice that the mic is set up just perfectly for her. She
It's
didn't
my
have to
height.
hold it.
Yep.
So it all depends on which building we're in, you know.
And I'm not usually considered short, so I
Yeah.
don't know what it is with this crowd.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We don't have any other reports. We have no old business listed on the agenda. So 7.1, new business. To elect Dustin Miles as the assistant principal at the Libby, Tozier, and Carrie Ricker schools as recommended by the superintendent of schools for the 2021-2022 school year.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Discussion. So typically our superintendent gives us some words. Would you like to address this and let us know why you applied for the position? And oh, look, the mic might be the right height again.
It is. I think Jamie and I are already working pretty well as a team. So my name is Dustin Miles. I've been a teacher for the last 18 years. For the last 10 years, I've been at Lewiston Public Schools, where I've been a classroom teacher as well as a math coach for the last 4 years. I'm just really excited to work in such a great community, and I've already met some of the staff, and it's just a really nice district that I'm looking forward to. Questions?
All right, so did our personnel committee send in on the interview?
Yes, I was in on the interview.
All right. Okay. We take a lot of trust in what our committees recommend, and obviously, if you recommended to come forward, you wouldn't be here. Is there any other questions, Mr. Miles?
None on Zoom?
Well, in that case, we'll call for the vote.
Christy? Yes. Dory?
Yes.
Thank you. Robbie?
Yes.
Diane?
Yes.
Jen?
Yes.
Joe?
Yes.
Bob?
Yes.
Motion passes. Welcome.
All right,
Welcome.
welcome. 7.2, entertain a motion to elect Darren Collins as a math teacher at the Oak Hill Middle School as recommended by the superintendent of schools for the 2021-2022 school year.
So moved. Seconded.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? I don't see another unfamiliar face. Mr. Collins must not be with us tonight. Yes. Mr. Wilson?
So this is a different situation where we hired Mr. Collins as an Ed Tech 3, but his certification has come through with the state, so we're moving him from an Ed Tech 3 to a teacher contract. So he's been with us already this year.
All right, thank you. All right. There's no other questions, then I'll call for the vote.
Christy?
Yes.
Dory?
Yes.
Robbie?
Yes.
Jen?
Yes.
Joe?
Yes.
Bob?
Yes.
Me.
Diane.
Diane. Yes.
Diane.
I have an old sheet for this one. So- Diane. Motion passes.
Okay. 7.3, entertain a motion to approve continuing contract for the following teachers. The list was attached in our agendas.
So
Those of
moved.
us who got them electronically. I heard a
I'll
motion
second
and a second. Yeah. Any comments, questions?
None on Zoom?
No, so I think, Christy, your question that you had about somebody on the list, was answered? Maybe.
Yeah, so the new packet was updated with the 2 names removed and sent back out. So those of you who had the digital copy, you have the accurate list.
Any comments? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote.
Christy?
Yes.
Dory?
Yes.
Robbie?
Yes.
Diane?
Yes.
Jen?
Yes.
Joe?
Yes.
Bob?
Yes.
Motion passes.
All right, committee reports, Finance Facility Committee.
We did not meet, but we will be meeting for our next meeting.
Personnel Policy Committee.
We will also be meeting next time around.
All right, CAI and Technology Committee.
We did meet. It was myself with Marco and Mel Gagnon and Kathy, and it was looking over the current, for the upcoming school year, course of studies for the high school, and there were less than a handful of changes. So it looked very good. It was actually just a dropping of a couple of classes because teachers didn't feel as though staff has shifted, so the people weren't going to be available to teach it. Otherwise, a lot of work was done last year to make sure that all graduation requirements were updated within it. And Andy had recommended that we not necessarily have to bring it before the board because it had so few of changes. And I would agree, having had experience in all of that fun stuff. Okay. And that's it.
You know who's doing that? All right, we enjoy the people's humor out there, wasting our time and theirs. So if there's no other comments, then we'll move on. That was the report. Board member comments? Any board member comments?
I'm sad that everybody on the board could not be present for Mr. Bailey's presentation tonight, but I'm glad that he brought the handouts. It's always nice to have that reminder of what he brings for us and what our job is.
Yeah, please look through the package because there's important information there for each of us on the board. Even, I mean, myself, every time I go to this, I've been to this training a few times. Something new comes up every time, something interesting, the laws change, and they change our responsibilities and duties from time to time. So it's important to stay up to speed on it. So 10.1, before we make the motion here, I did not get printed out because my ink cartridge went dry on me after about page 3 or 4 to bring a printed copy here with you, and I have it on my PC as a draft, and then I'll send it to the school board when the final and have it. But I don't know if there is, I mean, we could still discuss kind of in general the comments that I got and the evaluation, or we would need to put this off till next meeting when I can bring a copy to you to see. I'm not going to send out electronically, just because of the confidentiality of it, especially in a draft. All right. So I would just kind of like to get a consensus on whether or not you believe the executive session would be appropriate tonight. I don't want to go into it if we can't come up with a final evaluation I can give the superintendent. So, I mean, the feelings on whether or not we should have this executive session. Robbie?
Yeah, I don't think there's any problem with waiting until the next meeting, Bob.
I would agree.
You know,
We're already past the December,
yeah.
Right.
or September, October.
right.
Yeah.
All right, if there's nobody that has a different opinion and wants to do this tonight, then I will pass over 10.1, or I guess the appropriate way, because I didn't do an adjustment, is entertain a motion. If a motion's not made, then we will just pass over it. Okay, so I'll entertain a motion to enter to an executive session pursuant to 1 MRSA 4056A evaluation of the superintendent. Is there a motion? Hearing no motion, then that will fail. And we'll go on to adjournment. Thank everybody for coming tonight, for listening. I hope you all stay safe, stay warm, and enjoy every bit of life that you can. So without further objection, I will declare this meeting adjourned.